with a former United States ambassador to Syria, Robert Ford, who's a fellow at the Middle East Institute in Washington and a professor at Yale University's Jackson Institute, as well as Democratic Congressman Adam Smith. He also joins us from the state of Washington. Congressman, let me ask you about this. What is our policy towards Syria? Are we trying to dump the Assad family, get them out of there, or are we trying to live with them? What is it?
Well, right now, Trump doesn't have a policy, so we don't have a clear policy. But look, I think there is a policy here, and that is to recognize that as long as Assad is in power, there will be chaos in Syria. There's no question about that. He is an illegitimate ruler, and that is the way most Syrians view him. Frankly, both the extremists in ISIS and the moderates who started the protest, 5, 6 years ago now. So as long as he's in power, there's going to be chaos. But the trick is, number one, it's not easy to get him to leave, and number two, what comes next? And that's where our policy has always fallen short. This is what President Obama tried to do. He tried to build up a coalition of Syrian moderates who could offer an alternative to Assad. You know, the U.S. military going in there and just taking him out would not be a good policy. But it's also not a good policy for us to say that Assad is somehow okay. He's very clearly not.
What do you mean by legitimate or not legitimate? Except for Israel, which has democratic elections, I'm trying to figure out the Baathists and the monarchists in the Middle East. Who has elections? What is a legitimate leader in the Arab world, as you see it, Congressman?
Yeah, that's a much complicated.
Well, you just said it's not legitimate. Who is? El-Sisi?
Well,
King Abdullah? Which Abdullah? I mean, are they all illegitimate as you see it?
It is a very complicated question, but a leader like Bashar Assad, who has murdered hundreds of thousands of his own people, is clearly not legitimate. Look, there is a huge problem with governance throughout the Arab world. Legitimate governance that has the support of the people and respects human rights. But I think we can all agree that Assad has taken that to a level way beyond any of the others in terms of the way he has systematically butchered his own people and destroyed his own country. I don't know, what you would say about the folks who haven't stepped over that line, but Assad unquestionably has stepped over that line and is no longer a legitimate leader for a people that he's more interested in killing than he is in leading.
Pretty toughly said. Let me go to Ambassador. Ambassador, what do you make of this, Ambassador Ford? Why does he do something that the whole world hates him doing, using chemical weapons? I mean, is he that desperate? I didn't think he was. I thought he was stabilizing the situation.
Chris, he does not care about world opinion. Let me say that very clearly. He does not care about world opinion. He cares about a balance of power. It's a police state. And so, especially with Russian and Iranian help, he's winning in the civil war. He's not going anywhere. Basically, the war against Bashar al-Assad is winding down, and Assad is going to stay.
Does he have tickets for an airplane to the south of France or to Moscow?
He doesn't need
What's
tickets.
plan B for these guys? Because you think he's definitely going to stay. He's going to win.
Absolutely, he's going to stay. He took Aleppo, the last major opposition-held city, the eastern part of Aleppo. He took it in January. And the war is winding down. And so as much as all of us who had hoped to see Syrians gain a chance for accountable government that better respected human rights, it's not going to happen.
Well, this is pretty pathetic. Anyway, Secretary Tillerson said, just listen to this, first said Assad's fate was up to the Syrian people. Late last month, just 5 days before the chemical weapons were used in Syria. And then he appeared to contradict himself, this is our Secretary of State, this past Thursday, before reverting back to his original position on Sunday morning. And yesterday, Senator John McCain said that Tillerson's original statement before the chemical attack was partially to blame for Assad's behavior using the chemical weapons. Let's watch McCain.
Do you think the administration did anything to encourage this behavior by the Syrians by saying that the Syrian people would determine Assad's fate and that removing him is not a priority, things that were said before the use of chemical weapons?
I think it probably was partially to blame, and Secretary Tillerson basically saying the same thing after kind of contradicting himself and then saying the same thing argues vigorously for a plan and a strategy.
Well, here's how Secretary Tillerson addressed the question of whether his statement was responsible for emboldening Assad.
Are you worried at all that that was taken as a green light by Assad to launch that chemical attack?
George, I don't see how that could be the case. You know, this is not the first chemical attack launched by Assad. In fact, there were 2 other chemical attacks. So this was just the latest in a series of violations.
Ambassador, what's our policy? Is it to dump Assad or not? To try to dump Assad or not? I'll go back to the congressman on that. He said we don't really have a clarity there. What is it?
Policy in Syria, clearly in the Trump administration, as it was in the Obama administration's last several years, is first and foremost to defeat the Islamic State, to take its territory in Syria. And the United States and its allied forces in Syria, mostly Syrian Kurds, are actually making a lot of progress on that. There is no particular policy now about getting rid of Bashar al-Assad, and we couldn't anyway, Chris. There are tens of thousands of Iranian and Iranian-backed militias there. There are Russian, 4,000 to 5,000 Russian soldiers there. The days of thinking that we, the Americans, can just go in and sweep Assad out are gone. It may frustrate us immensely, but it is what it is.
Congressman, is that accepted on the Hill?
I think it is. I think it is unfortunate. I think the ambassador described the situation perfectly. You know, and the Russians have to be held accountable for this. The Iranians have been helping Assad for a long time, but Assad was actually in trouble until the Russians stepped in, gave him air support, gave him, you know, ground support, stepped in and really made the difference. But look, the policy is frustrating and difficult because Assad is everything that he's been described as. Question: how do you get rid of him? You know, what's the cost of getting rid of him? What comes next? And look, Assad's no dummy. I mean, he let ISIS people out of jail as the revolution was starting because that's who he wanted to fight. That's who he wanted to pit himself against. Yeah. But I will say that if it comes down to Assad still being in power, I don't believe we can defeat ISIS. As long as he is out there as a symbol of oppression, then you will have people who, you know, support ISIS still coming into Syria to fight Assad as an illegitimate ruler. So there's no clear path. There's no easy path. We cannot just say we accept Assad, period. That sends the wrong signal.
Well, okay. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you very much, Ambassador Robert Ford and Congressman Adam Smith. I'll just say the American people will not stand for that point of view. It is a fact, however, that we have to get rid of Assad before we're going to get rid of ISIS. But if we can't get rid of Assad, we're stuck with ISIS. And I don't think the American people are going to that for 8 more years, let alone 4 more years. Anyway, up next, the Trump resistance. 3 special elections in 3 states are giving Democrats